presentation focuses on the process of how Russia came into the Caucasus. So we talk about the current geopolitical developments. We talk about Armenia, Georgia, Azerbaijan, Artsakh, etc. And I just go like, okay, good. But basically, it's important to not forget how did Russia come into this region, because there's been some talk, some people say that, for example, is Russia leaving the Caucasus? Is Russia's position relevant in the Caucasus? And actually, I mean, in terms of the present day situation, I mean, here in Armenia, despite Pashinyan's best efforts, we can see very clearly, if you just walk on Avovian Street, right, next to where we are right now, every other person on the street is speaking Russian, in addition to, of course, Armenian. And you also have, naturally, you go to the stores, you see Russian products, you turn on TV, you see Russian culture. So Russia is very much everywhere. But still, nevertheless, there are these kind of analyses. You hear that Russia is departing. And I would submit that that actually is incorrect, and also it is blind to the history of how Russia came to this region and why Russia values this region of the Caucasus. So I call this the prisoner of the mountains. Question mark. Is Russia a prisoner of this region that I'm talking about today? And again, we have this allusion to Pushkin. You know, I had to, of course, incorporate this. Or if you want to allude to Leonid Gaidai's famous film, we have that as well. But my whole point here is to show the whole process of how did Russia get to this region, right? So we talk about the southward expansion of Russia. Every history of the Russian expansion toward the Caucasus begins with, our good friend Ivan Grozny.
I request you to speak into the mic.
Yes, sorry about that. That the history begins with our good friend Ivan Grozny, right? I could also reference another very famous Soviet comedy in relation to this, but I digress. With the conquest of Kazan in 1552 and Astrakhan in 1556, and in addition to this, we also had the role of the Cossacks, Kassaki, who basically, again played this kind of leading push toward the expansion in the Caucasus, especially when we look at the Terek River, and they were not, of course, the only Cossacks that were involved in this process. You had Kuban Cossacks, you had Don Cossacks, but for our purposes right now, I'm focusing on actually Terek Cossacks, right? Then we fast forward to, hold your seats, because we're fast forwarding to the 18th century here, where Peter the Great, the great Tsar reformer, had this idea of trying to find. I hope I'm not pulling way too hard from the microphone. Was trying to find access to the sea. This was his big idea, his big ambition, access to the sea, right? And you have him here. We're talking about Senate Square in St. Petersburg. Here you have me meeting with, the great Imperator. And yes, I know. It's all quite interesting, isn't it? Yes. So anyway, Russia, you think it's so huge. There's so much water here. There's so many outlets to the sea. But they're not the most ideal outlets to the sea. Peter wanted an outlet to the Baltic Sea and also in the south toward the warm water ports in the Black Sea. So you have this. You have, of course, look at the situation Russia was faced with in the Black Sea region. 1696, Peter takes Azov. This is extremely important for the whole process of the southern expansion toward the Caucasus. But then he loses it. But then Catherine the Great retakes it in 1774. But Peter also has his eyes, especially once he's defeated Charles XII of Sweden in the Great Northern War. Right? This is how we end up at St. Petersburg. He turns his attention south again, toward the Caspian Sea, in his Persian campaign, or Caspian campaign, of the 1720s. And in this campaign, he has some interested allies in the region. He has the Georgian kingdom of Kartli, right? This is Vakhtang VI. And you also have the principalities, the Melitdoms of Sunik and Artsakh, right? And I use, of course, this term Artsakh to refer, this is a map from the 9th century. But when we look at this period, the map looks more like this. And in fact, I talk about Artsakh as a single region, but in fact we're dealing with a period where it's known as Khamsa, the 5, right? The 5 Melitdoms of Karabakh, right? And so these were Peter's allies in the region. You even also had the famous case of Israel Ori, who was in the service of the Tsar, right? And again, I want to emphasize the importance of Sunik and Artsakh to the whole process of the Russian expansion, right? In addition to Kartli and later on Kakheti as well. Also, Israel Ori is from Sisian. Georgia, we have here again our good friend Vakhtang, the Vakhtang VI. Right? So anyway, you have the Peter the Great's Persian campaign of the 1720s, or Caspian campaign. He takes several settlements here along the Caspian coast. I'm not going to go into all the details because I don't want to be here all day talking about that. I'm just giving you a quick overview of what was going on. And actually, even if you go to Edinburgh, the Russian National Library, they actually recently had a whole, exhibition on Peter the Great and his campaigns, including this Kaspiyski Pohod or Persitsky Pohod, and you get the idea. Unfortunately, the kind of gains from this campaign were quite limited. In the end, Peter's troops faced great difficulties. There was disease, malaria, and so on and so forth. Eventually, Russia forfeited these positions. The Armenians and the Georgians, unfortunately, were left in the lurch to defend themselves against an invading Ottoman force. This is where our friend Vakhtang VI, so this is David Bek and Sunik fighting against the Turks. But then you had Vakhtang VI, who fled to Russia, right? He's buried in Astrakhan, as a matter of fact. Later on, Persia, which was also in civil war at this period of time, under Nader Shah, reconstitutes itself. Nader Shah cuts a deal with the Empress the Empress Anna. I'm sorry about that. My mind is jumping ahead to Catherine the Great. He cuts a deal with Empress Anna to get back the Caspian territories that Peter took. And you basically have the situation. But still, Russia has that interest going south. That is not something that they're going to let go of. And as we know, in the Russo-Turkish War, 1768 to 1774, Turkey is handed a brutalizing defeat by the Russians. And you have here, of course, our good friend Potemkin, who is a favorite of Catherine. This is kind of photoshopped, but you get the idea. Very, very romantic favoritism, right? Well, Catherine defeats the Turks, and this brings Russia closer. It brings Russia closer in the Black Sea region. Now, all of a sudden, you have Russia in the area that is today known as Novorossiya, right? This is our favorite Donbass, and our favorite Zaporizhia and Kherson, and all this, but also, especially, Crimea. This is the most important piece of property that Russia gets, and the most important property that Russia possesses today. So 1774, this is a huge victory, although many foreign observers are not so impressed with this, particularly in England, right? They are very critical of Catherine. A good dose of misogyny is also on display here. You have this too, Catherine in a bear suit. Now let me ask the audience members, does this image look familiar to you? It may look familiar to you. Why? Because I've seen this show before. Whenever Russia becomes successful, you always have a kind of a big kind of uproar from certain critics in the West. And we have a whole collection of this, actually, by the way. We have this welcome to Moscow, and it's so it goes, and then, from Kerch in Crimea, this brings Russia even closer to the Caucasus, right? And the Georgians see an opportunity. By now, it's Kakheti, because the people from Kakheti and the people from Kartli decide to get together under this unified Bagrationi kingdoms. So Bagratuni, there's this old, Armeno-Georgian dynasty that goes back, in the centuries. This name Bagration, we know the great Georgian hero of the Napoleonic Wars of 1812, Bagration. Think about Baradina. This is a big name in the Caucasus, right? So the Georgians see an opportunity to get together with the Russians, right? And there's also this issue that there's greater connectivity. You have the expansion by the Russian forces of the Georgian military road in 1783, extremely important artery to the region. And I just want to make sure my time here is good. Yes. Of course, it's always good to see the beautiful churches like Georgievsk Monastery in the mountains here. Vladikavkaz, a year later, is established after the expansion of the Georgian military road. The name itself in Russian, Vladikavkaz, gives you a good intention of, or gives you a good idea of the Russian intentions for the region, right? Vlast, it's basically the idea of leader, of master of the Caucasus. I'll use that translation, master of the Caucasus. So anyway, the Georgians see an opportunity to get together with the Russians, and in the Georgievsk Treaty of 1783, Catherine and Irakli II get together to negotiate the beginning of a beautiful friendship, Georgia and Russia, right? Or Eastern Georgia and Russia, because it's not yet the full Georgia, right? But you get the idea here. This is, again, the famous Soviet-era monument commemorating that treaty. Of course, the Russian motives, strategic position, strategic factor, vis-a-vis the Ottomans, right? And also mineral resources. Catherine is told there are mineral resources there. It's close to the potential allies in eastern Armenia. Also, it brings Russia closer to the trade routes of the east. This was a big motivation for why Peter gets in the region. By the way, when we talk about the overarching reasons for the Russian expansion into the Caucasus, all you have to do is take a flight from Yerevan to St. Petersburg. Because what do you see? You look out the window of your airplane and you see the mountains of Armenia, the mountains of Georgia, the mountains of Dagestan. And then when you go to Russia, you see flat land. Flat. It's flat, right? And so for Russia to come into this region of the Caucasus, it provides it with a natural border. Because the whole history of Russia's expansion, of course, there's the interest in resources, there's the interest in trade, and so on and so forth. But it's the issue of the security. Because the Russians, sometimes they don't even want to expand. But it's for that search for a defensible border, for defensible frontiers. That's a huge, huge reason. Am I correct? Okay. I get my approval there from my Russian colleague. But anyway, you get the idea that this is so significant. This Caucasus is a natural fortress, a krepest for the Russians, right? So you have those Russian motives. Georgian motives, also security, strategic factor. They want protection against the Persians and the Ottomans. Kartli Kaketi is under informal Persian influence. They don't like that. There are problems with economy. Irakli wants to unite the country. He has problems with nobles, and so on and so forth. Basic terms: Georgian allegiance to Russia, Georgian foreign policy under Russian control, but also Russian support for Georgian security, and at least for now, continuation of Bagrationi dynasty. So you have that. And Russian forces are also stationed in Georgia. This is a huge thing because Georgia in its history never allowed for forces to be stationed there. What happens though, unfortunately, is due to another Russo-Turkish war, the Russians have to withdraw the forces from Georgia temporarily. Doesn't mean that they're not interested in this region or that they have no ambitions in the region, but sometimes when you're dealing with certain situations, you have to withdraw temporarily. Such was the case here. But meanwhile, in Persia, you had the rise of a new dynasty, the Qajar dynasty, and Aga Muhammad Khan Qajar really wanted to teach the Georgians a lesson. You can't go against us. You are in our influence. What is this idea of you going to the Russians? And in 1795, he sacks Tiflis, right? a question for you, a question for the audience. What was Catherine the Great's reaction to this? Was she happy that Tiflis was sacked? Was she satisfied with this? Probably not. Actually, no, she was not. She was furious. She was furious. And she authorized, again, another expedition against Persia in the Caucasus, led by Valerian Zubov, who was the younger brother of another favorite of Catherine, Platon Zubov. Right? Zubov's become very famous later on when we talk about the death of Tsar Paul I. He wasn't very popular, what can I say? Argutinsky, he was this kind of Armenian advisor to them. But this campaign does not last because Paul comes into the region, pulls the plug on the Zubovs, who he hates. He also hates Catherine, his mother. There's a long familial history here. But in the end, he does not last. You see his end date, 1801. He annexes Georgia outright. He annexes Kartli Kakheti outright. And you have a new czar who comes into the picture. The Persians are still not happy with the situation. They're furious with the situation. But Russia is now in the region. And when you look at a map, you begin to understand the dynamics a little bit closer. There's the Georgian military highway. It's the only link connecting Russia with Kartli Kakheti. So then the idea becomes, now we have to secure Kartli Kakheti. So we have to take all the territories around it. I don't have a laser pointer, so I have to do this. Is there like a mobile mic? Maybe I'll take the mobile mic. Yeah.
Thank you. You have 10 minutes.
Okay, good, thank you. I'm wrapping up. I'm getting toward the end here. But you have here the Georgian military road, Kartli Kakheti. The idea is really to take the areas around it to secure their central position in the Caucasus. Because now this becomes a new security dilemma for the Russians. You have a Georgian Prince Tsitsianov who's sent down to do this task and to bring the Georgian nobility back, or to bring the Georgian nobility to St. Petersburg. There's a lot more I can discuss with this, but for now, this is the overall picture. Persia is not happy with the situation, and you have, in 1804 to 1813, the First Russo-Persian War. Tiflis, as we know, this becomes the Russian center of the Caucasus. 1806, Baku is taken. Tsitsianov takes it. But then what happens to him? He is killed near Baku. But still, the process continues. Russia gradually gets Western Georgian principalities. We're talking here Mingralia, Abkhazia, Goria, and so on and so forth, Imereti, right? And in addition to that, they also have this issue emerging up here in the north, because the north is not under control. That's the part of the Caucasus that proves to be the most stubborn and the most difficult to take for the Russians. But it's also a security issue because they have something called the Lekia Nova, right? The raids of the North Caucasians, the Lezgi, although this is a general term, on the Georgian lowlanders in Kakheti. It's a big problem, right? So gradually, Russia is able to take up all these pieces. Here, the Treaty of Gulistan in 1813, Russia, these possessions are formalized under Russian control. Gulistan, this is in northern Nagorno Karabakh, northern Artsakh, right? You see this crepest of Gulistan from the 18th century. This again kind of gives you the idea. Among the 5 Melikdoms of Karabakh, Khamsa is the northernmost, north of the Marav Mountains, right? You get that idea here. And the final Russian expansion occurs in 1828 with the capture of, or with the Second Russo-Persian War, 1826-1828, with the taking of Yerevan and Eshmiadzin, but also Nakhichevan, right? This is when the rest of eastern Armenia becomes part of the Russian Empire. There is also a security element here too, because even if we go back to the period of Queen Tamar of Georgia, Queen Tamar the Great, right? It's another rendition of her. She looks like one of my former students at American University of Armenia. But anyway, you get the idea that what Queen Tamar did was she basically established the Shakarians in Armenia, And having this also kind of fortified Georgia in the south, because the Armenian plateau, the Armenian highland, is a natural crepust. So Russia took that same kind of cue, and we fast forward here now to the 19th century, and the idea was to get into eastern Armenia. And actually, Alexei Yermolov, very famous in the Russian expansion in the Caucasus, kind of provokes a war with the Persians in 1826. Eventually, Tsar Nicholas I, because now we have a new Tsar, he dismisses him, he puts in Paskevich. But in any case, you have the Treaty of Turkmenchay in 1828, right? And so, how many minutes do I have?
Maybe 5.
Okay, well, actually I'm not, as a matter of fact. But the idea is so then you have the Eastern Armenia, which is organized as now the Armянskaya Oblast here in the Caucasus. And this really kind of is more or less how the region is formulated as the region we know today. There are a few more expansions. We talk about the Russo-Turkish War of 1829 here. They take the area of, in this region of kind of Javaketi. There's also here 1870s war where they take Gars, they take the area of Ajaria on the Black Sea, Batumi. This is quite significant, quite important. And this is more or less the region as we know it today. But again, those security concerns do not diminish for Russia. For Russia, this is, like I say, a natural crepust, a natural fortress for a largely flatland state, a state that is largely steppe, right? Much like Ukraine, by the way, mostly steppe. But to have this mountainous crepust, this mountainous fortress, is so significant for the Russian security and really the Russian kind of preservation in this region, right? And not only the North Caucasus, but to have good relations with the three republics and to have stable relations with the three republics of the Southern Caucasus as well, with the balance of power, ideally between Armenia and Azerbaijan, which is now kind of off-kilter due to the most recent events. And so with that, I conclude, and thank you very much.
I want to thank Pietro for a very, very passionate and exciting historical journey. I would just like to mention that I will not be responsible for any statements during the presentation.
Oh, wait, excuse me.
I've seen. Oh, there's more.
I just wanted to also say this too. Actually, there was one more point I wanted to add, actually, to my presentation, that when we talk about this region, again, I'm sorry about this. I'm so sorry about this. How do you make it up? Full screen? I also want to emphasize, of course, when we talk about this Caucasus region, the importance also of Artsakh Nagorno Karabakh to the whole Russian expansion of the region. We cannot forget about that, especially in today's day and age. We have microphone.
Yes, here we go.
Okay, yeah. No. We cannot forget about the central position of Artsakh Nagorno Karabakh in this process. The Melikdoms of Karabakh. Actually, it's quite interesting because it was known as Artsakh or Khamsa historically, but then what happened was in the mid-18th century, the Malik Shahnazar allied with the Khan of Karabakh, and the region of Artsakh was subsumed into the Khanate of Karabakh, and from that time onward it was known actually as Nagorno Karabakh. It was never known as Nagorno Karabakh before. It was always known as Artsakh or Khamsa or Kachen, whatever, but it was never known before this time as Mountainous Karabakh. So that was the first thing. But it plays such a significant role with Kartli Kakheti, and actually both Kartli and Kakheti, in bringing Russia into the region. And we can say Kartli and Kakheti in Georgia, and Sunik and Artsakh in Armenia were like the Piedmonts for kind of the process of national unification of these entities and the bringing of Russia into the region. So that's the last point I want to make. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.